to this. Okay, it's being recorded. All right, hopefully it works and the recording is able to be sent out afterwards. It'll probably take me a couple of days because it takes a long time to download sometimes. And yes, I can share slides afterwards. And I also would like you to take notes, but also I am going to try and share in the chat 3 handouts, and I'll do that now before I get started. Let's see if I can, how I can do this. Oh, I can do it from my computer. Interesting. I'm just trying to share the 3 slides or 3 handouts that I have for you. There's the first one. Then there's 2 more. You can download these, they're PDFs, and it's just supplemental information to go along with all that we're talking about today. There's so much to share that it's almost impossible to cram it into an hour and a half. So I like to add a little bit of information on, for those of you who want to dive deeper into this topic. It really is something that you could keep learning about forever. I learn something new about trauma every day. So yeah, it's important that if you are raising children with trauma, that this isn't the only training you come to. It's something you need to keep learning about and keep researching and looking for new resources and trying things until they work, because that's what it's all about. Just keep trying and trying until you find what works. Okay. All right, so those are in there. Please let me know if you are able to access them and download them in the chat. You will be sharing papers after? I'm on my phone. Oh, so I can, if you email me, if you send me an email and say that you weren't able to access the handouts, I can send them to you. And my email is just beth@bethtyson.com. And you can also always find me on my website at bethtyson.com. And you can also subscribe to my newsletter on my website as well on the homepage. And my website is brand new. It just came out today. So really excited, or not today, yesterday. Was it yesterday? I don't know, this week. It came out, my brand new website. It's spanking new, and I hope that you guys love it. I put a lot of time and effort and love and care into it. So I did message everyone. Thank you, Katie. This is so weird having a conversation with a chat box and not being able to hear you guys. If anyone knows how for me to fix that, let me know. Because I would like to be able to hear you guys. It would really make things a lot easier. Let's see, are the messages just going to other panelists? What is your email again? My email is beth@bethtyson.com. I see a hand raised. Let's see if I can answer. This is so weird. I'm not used to this. Okay, allowed to talk. Oh, here we go. RW, I can't see your whole name, but I'm allowing you to talk. You can unmute. Ask to unmute. RW, can you hear me? Okay, it looks like the handouts aren't coming through. So what we'll have to do is maybe I'll have to figure out a way to send a mass email out to everybody who attended, or I can have you just drop your email if you want the handouts, to drop your email in the chat. And that way I can get them to you. Says I have you as talking permitted. Sorry guys for all this. I'm not sure. It says you have to unmute if you want to talk. All right. Well, we'll have to just use the chat for now. But if you put your email address in the chat, I'll add you to my mailing list. I'll add you to my newsletter. that I send out once a month with all types of childhood trauma resources, a trauma warrior of the month, somebody who's a huge advocate for trauma. I share tips and guidance in that newsletter, and I also give you my latest updates of events that are coming up or resources or anything that might be relevant to my viewers. So please drop your email in there and I'll add you to the list. Great. Okay. Let's see. Any other announcements? So this information that I'm sharing today could be triggering if you have unprocessed trauma. And so I would like you to remember that you're able to exit out of this at any time if it's too upsetting to you, and to always seek mental health support if you're struggling with your own mental health. This does not replace any type of therapy. I can't give therapeutic, advice because we're not in a confidential relationship. And so this is really just for educational purposes only. And any questions that you have that I don't answer in the webinar, feel free to email them to me afterwards. All right, it looks like people are dropping the emails in there. Okay. I can hear RW. Do you still have a question, RW? Are you there? No? Okay. All right. I don't know. Let's see. Okay. Well, let's get started. Okay. Thank you for all for bearing with me today. Life doesn't always go the way we plan it, does it? So our agenda today is what is trauma and how does it show up? How trauma impacts the brain and the nervous system, how restoring trust helps children cope and heal, what hinders the healing process, and also a little bit about my children's book. If you don't know about it, I share about it up here a little bit, just that I published a children's book a couple of years ago for kinship families or grandfamilies, grandparents who are raising their grandchildren due to all types of adverse situations in the child's home. And oftentimes there just isn't a lot of resources available on this topic. And so when I was working as a child welfare, a childhood trauma therapist with the child welfare system, I always wanted a children's book to bring with me to talk to these families and to the children about what they were going through. But there just wasn't one that existed at the time. So I said, one day I'm going to publish my own. And I did. So that's where my little children's book, A Grand Family for Sullivan, it's a big part of my heart out in the world. And if you work with children or you are a grand family, this is a wonderful resource to help talk about ambiguous loss, trauma, difficult big feelings and emotions, and how to calm a child's anxiety, how to teach a child to calm their own anxiety with all of the experiences that they're going through. So I encourage you to check that out. Okay. So first we're going to start off talking about ACEs, and it's unfortunate because I don't know how much you guys know or don't know about ACEs and trauma. But if you have never heard of the term ACEs, it stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it was a study done back in the 90s with thousands, I think it was something like 12,000 people, to see, how their early life experiences affected them over the long term. And what they found was that things such as listed on this slide, abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction affected the children's physical health and their emotional health over the long term. So the outcomes for children that had a higher number of these adversities in their lives ended up down the road with more trouble with mental health and physical health. So what we're trying to do here today is talk about how to help these children that have been through some of the hardest situations and are some of the most vulnerable children in our communities. And you may not have a child that you're caring for yourself, but there's definitely at least one child in your child's classroom that might be going through something similar to this, or perhaps they are being raised by their grandparents or a relative or a foster family. And so knowing this information, you can pass it down to your family and help them have empathy for people in the community who are really struggling with their mental health due to trauma. So the three categories: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Abuse includes physical, emotional, or sexual. Neglect can be physical or emotional. So it's about the things you didn't get emotionally. We often skip over that one when we think about abuse and neglect, but it's the things you didn't get, right? It's the things the child didn't get. Maybe they weren't acknowledged for their feelings. Maybe they weren't paid attention to when they were sad or upset. Maybe they had nobody to turn to when they were scared. So this lack of support is also a form of trauma. And then household dysfunction, such as mental illness, substance abuse, a mother who's being treated violently, or a father, divorce, substance abuse, incarcerated relative. So those were the categories they studied. But since then, this was back in the 90s, since then we have realized that obviously there's many more adverse experiences that children can experience. And these are some more of them. So it's not just those categories, but we find that ACEs include all of these other things as well. Oh, it's not on play. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Oh, okay. All right, let me see here. Okay. So the definition, there's many definitions, but I think this one really encapsulates what trauma is the best. It's a distressing emotional response to tragic events in childhood that impair healthy attachment to caregivers and brain body functioning. Still having some questions coming in. Hold on one second. I can't move my chat around when people are, let's see, is anybody reporting any troubles? No. Okay. Okay. So a little bit more about childhood trauma. That children experience it as sometimes as reactions instead of memories or flashbacks. So what we've found in the research is that PTSD is what we normally say somebody had, or what is a possible diagnosis for somebody that's experienced trauma. However, children often don't meet the criteria for PTSD because they lack some of those visual memories and flashbacks, and they don't always meet all the criteria. So the reaction is in their behaviors. And so they may not have a memory of what happened to them, or they may not be having flashbacks or intrusive images, but they respond to their environment with these strong reactions and explosive behaviors at times, or really strongly withdrawn behaviors and dissociation. So we see their behavior as a reaction instead of necessarily them having memories and flashbacks. There's triggers in the environment all the time for children that have experienced trauma, and they are often unconscious, and they're often not things that we would typically realize were even happening to a child. So it's important to remember that when a child is in a trauma response, that their behaviors could be a result of an unconscious trigger, like a sight, smell, taste, touch, or any sensory information that's coming into their environment and into their brain could be a trigger for the trauma, which brings up a reaction. It brings up strong emotions and sometimes acting out and aggressive behavior or crying or withdrawal or dissociating. And the trauma creates a lack of safety and trust in the world around them. And that's why we're here talking today about trust, because in my opinion, when we can restore and rebuild that broken or damaged trust, we can start to heal and recover from the trauma. And I use that word heal lightly because I think that trauma is a lifelong journey that you learn to move forward with, a lot like grief. You know, grief doesn't ever really have an ending or a closure. It's more so that you learn to live with the grief, and it sort of comes along with you, but it morphs and matures over time. And I think that it would be really hard to say that we ever reach a full place of healing after a major trauma has taken place, but more so that's we're recovering and we're healing, we're working towards healing. So I just say that because I don't want anyone to have the expectation that you need to reach some destination with a child where they are healed, and all the problems are gone. That might not be realistic expectation. It could be, but it's not always the case. So why do we see all these behaviors with children? Well, the one thing we know is that trauma changes the brain, and it creates neural pathways in the brain towards feelings of towards feelings of fear and uncertainty and threat. So the brain has been primed to notice threats in the environment because of the amount of overwhelm that they might have experienced during the trauma. And the way the brain gets set up, especially in early life, is difficult to shift out of, but it is possible. And that's another thing I want to make sure that I share with you all today, is the hopeful part of all of this is that children's brains are more malleable than adult brains. So while it may be really difficult for an adult to change their behavior, it can often be easier for children to build these new neural pathways because their brain is still so flexible and squishy and and still has the ability to be malleable and morph and change over time. So that is the hopeful part about all this. But at the same time, that's not to take away from the fact that this trauma has seriously impacted their brain, and we need to do some work to help and rebuild those healthy neural pathways for trust and safety and security, because that's what's lost when we have a trauma. We lose our sense of safety and trust and certainty in the world. And that's what has happened with COVID-19. And that's why we're seeing a children's mental health crisis right now, is because all of their sense of normalcy and their sense of certainty and safety was ripped away from them overnight. And for the first time, they realized the world is not always a safe, happy place. And that can be really disorienting for children and create mental health problems. And there were plenty of problems before that we were struggling with children's mental health. But I think, this has been like a tipping point, that COVID kind of tipped things right over the edge. And for adults too, it's not easy. The brain, so trauma changes the brain. And what happens is that children and adults, we repeat what feels familiar. This is why you often see adults who experience abuse as children getting into abusive relationships as adults, because even though it's terrible and awful and scary, it feels familiar. And if the brain finds something familiar, that actually feels somewhat controllable and safe to them. And so children will often leave an abusive home or a neglectful home or a chaotic home and go into a foster home or a grandparent's home and have all these big reactive behaviors because they're not used to the calm, nurturing environment. They're not used to having adults who are acting with empathy and care and love. And so they'll try to repeat what was their norm. And their norm might have been, a lot of fighting and chaos and craziness. And so when they go into this super calm home and it's safe, they feel actually off kilter, and they actually feel like they need to get all that stimulation back because that's what their brain has become used to. So it takes time, and you have to be patient and keep providing that support over and over again to help the brain relearn that this is the new normal now. What life was like before was not healthy and was not the right setup for well-being, but now you need to create a new model for what a healthy family looks like. There's also the fear of being rejected or attaching to somebody again. When your primary caregivers have done harm to you and they're supposed to be the ones that are protecting you, it becomes very difficult to discern who is safe and who is not in the world. And so there's a fear, a real deep-seated fear of attaching or getting close to anybody because they don't want to be rejected again, or they don't want to be hurt again. It actually could be a life-threatening situation for them in their minds to get involved and get close to somebody. Negative attention also distracts them from emotional pain. So a child who's getting in trouble all the time, or who's, a child who's getting in trouble or reprimanded all the time, they're getting negative attention and it distracts them from the fear and pain that they're experiencing and sadness that they're experiencing, because they can either be angry instead, which is usually a secondary emotion, or they are getting all this attention for the negativity and they don't have time to even think about the sadness and the fear. So it distracts them from that. Their brain is also in a state of fear and the decision-making process is not functioning properly. So when a child experiences trauma, the prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making, analytical, logical part of your brain, actually just stops functioning as well, and it goes in the brain starts operating out of the fear center of the brain as a purpose, which has a purpose to protect you and to protect the child and to run, fight, or freeze. And there's another one called fawn, and there's a few others that people have added on too as trauma responses. But this is what your brain does to protect you. It goes into the fear state. And when you're in that fear state, you can't make a lot of healthy decisions and your judgment is not clear because the only thing that matters to you is your survival. And so you don't care about homework and you don't care about following the rules because in your mind, you are literally running from a bear right now who's trying to kill you, even though in reality, that might not be the case. And also let's just put it out there that these children have valid rage that they need to express. What happened to them is so unfair and so unjust. And they do have a lot of pent up rage and anger inside of them that they need to release with a safe adult. And that's what we're here to do today, to talk about how you can help a child release some of that with you, and for you not to take it personally, but to see it actually as an opportunity to build trust with the child. Here are some involuntary reactions. Oftentimes children with trauma get blamed for their behaviors, but these are not choices that a child is making. This is a reaction to the trauma that they've experienced, and reaction to possible triggers in their environment. So it's not that the child is troubled or doesn't care or doesn't want to do their homework or listen and follow the rules, but oftentimes it's that they can't because they are not functioning from the part of the brain that would allow them to think clearly and make those healthy decisions. And here's a little bit more to explain that, a visual. So we have an unstressed brain. The prefrontal cortex, that front part right up here, is working and connecting to the rest of the parts of the brain and is allowing the child to make healthy decisions. It have it take control over their thoughts and emotions and actions. But when your brain is stressed, the prefrontal cortex dims out. It's not the main driver of the car anymore. If you think of yourself as the car, your prefrontal cortex isn't driving anymore. Your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, is driving, and you're going to have a weaker control of thoughts and emotions and actions when you're in that stress state. To answer Sarah's question, yes, I see in the chat, she had a question about a copy of the recording. Yes, there will be recording as long as the recording that I'm doing works. I will send it out after this presentation over the next few days. So this is a diagram I like to use when I'm explaining the way a child's brain is functioning when they are under extreme stress or in a state of hyperarousal. So the Yerkes-Dodson model of arousal is a diagram that explains sort of how we experience arousal throughout our day. And this is the example I give. So throughout the day, you might wake up in the morning and you're in that blue-gray zone where you're kind of just waking up. You're groggy, you're not fully awake, you're kind of in between like sleep and awake, and there's not a whole lot of arousal going on. You're not super stimulated. You're just kind of like tired and kind of getting your day started. As the day goes along, you have some breakfast, you start to perk up a little bit, you take a shower, you get ready and dressed for the day, you do your hair, whatever it might be. And then you get in the car and you're ready to go to work or off to start your day, and you feel alert and you feel engaged and you feel focused and you feel as though you're ready to take on the world. And that might be the top there where you're at your optimum performance, in the green area. And then as you're driving to work, somebody slams the brakes on in front of you, and suddenly you dip into that fight, flight, or freeze state, and you are feeling anxious and you hit the brakes and you're acting out of survival. You didn't even make the decision, right, to hit the brakes, but you did it. And you may have gasped, or you may have, your heart starts beating really fast, and you're kind of like, I know when that's happened to me, I'm kind of like frozen almost in a state of like shock. That's when you're in the hyper arousal mode in that red orange area. And that's when you have too much arousal going on in your body. And what we see is that when we have, what this graph describes is that when we have too much arousal, when we're in that red zone, our performance drops off significantly. So on by the blue side, you see where it says performance. Your performance as a human being is best when you're in that green zone. But as you tip into the red zone, it drops off exponentially. Your performance goes way down because you're over aroused, you're overstimulated, and you're overwhelmed, and you're not thinking clearly. And that is where many of the children are living on a daily basis if they've experienced trauma. And on the outside, they may seem as though they have it all together, but on the inside, this is what they're experiencing. And that is why we see all of the difficult behaviors and the inability to concentrate and follow directions and do their schoolwork and all the things that come along with that. And so what I want to help you do today is move things that will help you move the child from that red zone into the green zone. Because the more time we spend in the green zone, the more time we build up those patterns in the brain to reprogram and remodel the brain away from the trauma response and into a more calm and focused and alert state so that their functioning improves. So that's what I'll be giving you today, is some things that you can do to help them move into the green. So I see a question here. What are the key trauma responses beyond fight, flight, freeze, and fawn? There's a few more. I've seen recently people adding on additional ones. I don't know if they've been researched or studied, but you could look it up. I've seen a couple more added on, and I can't remember off the top of my head what they are, but if I think of it, I'll get back to you on it. And Tara says, I can imagine the teenage years will emphasize all of this even more. So yes, that is true. Adolescence is a time when a lot of the old trauma that may have happened in the past will bubble up to the surface and start to come out in behaviors. So oftentimes in my work with children, I would go and I'd be working with them, or I would get a referral and someone would tell me that they don't have any symptoms, they're doing fine in school, they're doing well, they're okay, there's no behaviors at home, and yet they had experienced all this trauma. Well, the child was probably between 4 and 10 years old. What they don't realize is if they don't address that trauma now as soon as possible and intervene early, and during adolescence, a lot of the emotions and the behaviors are going to bubble up and come out. And so that's why it's best to intervene with trauma as soon as possible, right after the event, or as soon as you know about it, or as soon as you can. And if you're just finding that out now, that's okay too. Like, get the help now for them, even if it's been a long time, because the sooner you get it, the less trouble they'll have over the long term. If you have a teen who had trauma in their early years and they're starting to have behaviors and you just continue to let it go, and they get into adulthood, it's just going to snowball into substance abuse and all of the other troubles that come from that, poor relationship choices and abuse, getting into abusive relationships and all the things that really just continue the spiral. And so get the help as soon as you can. And even if it's been a long time, still get the help. So we talked a lot about the negatives, right? And what it does to children. But now we're going to talk about PCEs. And you may not have heard about this because it's relatively new. It's called positive childhood experiences. These are the things that the research has shown to mitigate the impact of trauma and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. So the first one is felt experiences that the family is supportive. So feeling like you have family support around you, feeling like you belong in school, having at least two non-parent adults who genuinely care about you. That could be a coach, a therapist, a neighbor, an aunt, an uncle, grandparent. The ability to talk with your family about your feelings. So not having that closed door policy like it was, when I was growing up, a lot of families just shut all this talk about feelings away. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that. But now we really have realized how important it is to share about our feelings with each other. And so having an environment where a child feels as though they can openly share about their feelings without being judged or invalidated or ignored is a mitigating factor for childhood trauma. Enjoyment and participating in community traditions. So that would maybe be different events and cultural experiences. Maybe it's a church that they belong to, but being involved in the community, feeling supported by their friends, and feeling safe and protected at home. So again, there's that safety, being able to trust that they are safe is another key factor in mitigating trauma. And what does that mean? That means that connections matter. We can heal through our relationships to one another. Trauma happens in relationships and it is healed in relationships. Unfortunately, that is how it has to go. I don't know if it's unfortunate, but you know what I mean? It's unfortunate the trauma happens, but the good news is that healing happens in healthy, positive relationships. It fosters well-being and emotional strength and resiliency. And we all know what it's like to feel isolated and alone, or at least I do. I know what that has been like. And I've been through my own traumas. I lost my mom when I was 26 years old. She died suddenly in her sleep. And we were very close. And I still, even though I was 26, I spent a couple of nights of the week at her house still and would do my laundry there. And so I really was traumatized after her death, especially because it was so sudden and she was very healthy when it happened. And it did feel really isolating. And I did feel like nobody understood what I was going through at that time. But over time and through lots of therapy and through my relationships and through doing my own work and healing processes on myself and getting my master's degree in counseling, which was inspired by my mother's death, I have learned how to move through that trauma and reach a place of growth. And I couldn't have done that without the relationships around me, without my family, without my friends connecting and supporting me. And the truth is, and Harvard University backs this up with research as well, is that children only need one consistent, compassionate, loving adult in their life to overcome most of life's trauma and adversity. So you can be that one person. And I encourage you to be patient and to continue to provide that consistent care and love, and it will make a difference over time. Okay, Viv has a question. What if the child is isolated, bullied at school, and very limited friends? Adult support only one safe person who isn't always calm. So yeah, that's where we really that's a vulnerable situation. We really need to try and bolster up the support system around that child, whether it's through a mentor. There's lots of mentoring volunteer programs, whether it's through a counselor, whether it's through another family member that might be able to step in and be a support. Maybe it's a cousin or an uncle or a neighbor. Like it really focused on finding a person that can step in and be a support for that child. I know that's not always possible, but that's the direction you want to go. So whether it's getting them involved in sports or an extracurricular activity where they'll make relationships, that healing will happen through relationships. So Terrace is the same. That's our situation. Single working mom, I've adopted 10-year-old nephew whose parents are ODD. Oh, the Big Brother program has been helpful. Yes. CASA is another organization that I volunteer with, and they are a great resource for foster families and adoptive families who have involvement with the child welfare system. And so if you don't have a CASA volunteer, that's something that you can request from the social worker. So if you have questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. I'm a CASA volunteer as well. And so the role of trust, we've talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to go into it a little more detail. Trust and safety with a calm, caring adult is necessary to move a child out of a blue or red state, meaning on that mountain slide of arousal. Children really need an adult attachment figure, someone they're close to, someone they trust, to move them from that shutdown phase where you're under aroused and you might be withdrawn or dissociated, and that red phase where you're hyper aroused, overstimulated, and unable to perform in your everyday life. In order to get in that green phase, you really need a trusting, caring adult, because the children regulate their emotions with adults. So they regulate their nervous system and match it up with the adults they're around. So if you are a very volatile person and you are upset all the time or yelling and angry, well, the child's nervous system is going to mirror that. They mirror the adults that they're around. So if you come at them with a lot of anger and frustration and chaos, it's likely for their nervous system to react in the same way. But if you are able to provide a calm and comforting and soothing relationship for them, it helps their nervous system to match up and mirror up with yours and allows the child to calm down. So that's again, this next point, that one trustworthy, consistent attachment relationship. And there's a term for this. It's called a corrective emotional experience. And the more corrective emotional experience we have over time, that trust can be reestablished. So a corrective emotional experience is one that overlays the old memory or the old belief system. So it's kind of like the trauma and the early childhood belief system that got set up from the trauma is a dirt path. I just heard this analogy. I think I heard it in Bruce Perry's book. He calls it a dirt path. And what we want to do is build a 2-lane highway next door to that dirt path in their brain, so that they can start using that 2-lane highway, and they'll use the dirt path sometimes, but much less often, because it's not as easily accessible. So when we have these corrective emotional experiences with safe, caring adults, we start to build that other 2-lane highway. And the more and more experiences the child has with the caring, safe adult, the more and more that 2-lane highway gets built, and the less the child needs to rely on the dirt path, which is their old belief systems, their old ways of functioning. So I hope that makes sense. It made so much sense to me when I heard it, and I'm not doing it justice, but it is in the book, What Happened to You, with Bruce Perry, and Oprah, co-authored by Oprah. And Dr. Bruce Perry is one of my favorite trauma experts. I encourage you to look up his work if you haven't already. So again, these connections change the negative belief patterns, and to just never give up. Consider yourself a construction worker building that 2-lane highway for this child. And there's always hope that they will switch lanes and start using, the new connections and the new belief patterns that you're helping them set up. So now we're going to talk more about what can you actually do in the moment when a child is really triggered or is having a meltdown or has just experienced something traumatic. And this picture, I use it in all of my presentations because it's just so poignant and makes the point so much better than I ever could. And I'll read it to you. It says, "I'm afraid," said Rabbit. "What are you afraid of?" asked Bear. "I don't know," replied Rabbit. "I just am." "Then I will sit with you until you're not afraid anymore," said Bear. "We will face it together." And really, what do any of us really want in life or out of someone else more than that, right? Um, it's just being present, allowing someone to witness your pain and to not be judged or try to stop it or try to talk them out of it or distract them, but just to be with the pain and be witnessed and have your pain witnessed and be listened to and comforted. That's all we need to do in those tough moments. That is enough. That really is enough. And so I encourage you to build up your tolerance for tolerating a child's pain, because often what I see, and it's well intentioned, and I do it myself, I'm a mom and I know what it's like, um, who is uh, oftentimes she can be upset, and she has big emotions, and that's her personality, and we have worked through it over time, and I still struggle with it because it is so incredibly painful to witness your child or someone else's child in pain. It's a natural response to want to try and stop the crying, stop the suffering, distract the child with a screen or a toy, try to make them laugh or tickle them, whatever you can do to stop witnessing this pain, because it is so uncomfortable for us because we care so much. However, it's counterintuitive. It doesn't actually help the child when we distract them. It might help ourselves feel better in the moment, but it doesn't help the child to invalidate or take away or distract them from their pain. Sometimes we just need to sit with it and process it and feel it. And they need to feel it too. And they need to know it's okay to feel it, that we don't need to be afraid of our feelings, because our feelings really are a natural part of being human. All of them, not just happiness, not just contentment, not just cooperation and compliance. Those are nice to have, but anger and sadness and fear and disgust and frustration and rage, all of those emotions are a normal part of the human experience. And children deserve to be allowed to experience them and be accepted and loved anyway. Question. How to handle trauma in a late teen adult who's showing addictive, self-destructive, and aggressive behavior. Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that. I'll have to come back to that one. That's a big question. But thank you for asking it. So I've developed a tool. It's called the CARES model for connection. And CARES stands for consent, acceptance, reflection, empathy and education, share, and solve. Consent. So say a child is triggered or is having a big emotional reaction, and you don't know what to do. These are some steps that you can walk through in your mind, and you can memorize these and keep them with you, in any situation. So only yes means yes, which means you don't necessarily automatically want to go over to a child who's in distress and try and hug them or touch them or get too close to their body, because you don't know if that child was physically harmed by another human being. And that touch or that closeness might be the opposite of what they need in that moment. So although young children, we can't, we say they're too young to give actual consent, but I think you get my point here, is that ask the question at least. Don't assume that a child wants to be touched or held or hugged or even have your hand on their shoulder, when they are, especially when they're in a reactive place. It's much better to ask them, is it okay if I come close to you? Is it okay if I stay here with you? Or do you need something else right now? Do you need some space? And be willing to give that space if that's what they need in the moment, and provide a safety option as well. So one thing I always recommend to families is to have pillows they can grab quickly in each room of the house. So if one of your children start to have a meltdown or have a tantrum or just have been triggered and they go into explosive behavior, grab a pillow that you can put between you and the child to protect them, to protect yourself, not to use on the child in any way, but just as a barrier. It can prevent scratches and punches and kicks and things, and for people from getting hurt. So that's a good recommendation I heard somewhere a long time ago, and I still tell people that all the time. The next step is accepting the child's feelings and experiences unconditionally. So just because you don't think it's a big deal, or just because you don't understand why the child is acting out, that doesn't count. Your opinion about the situation is your opinion, and what they're feeling is valid. And you don't necessarily know why they're feeling the way they're feeling. You might think that it's because you told them to go take out the trash, but there could have been a trigger in their environment that set them off. And so, at times we need to be more accepting and less punishing with children, and try to find out what's underneath the behavior, as opposed to just jumping to, oh, he's just disrespectful, um, you know, jerky kid. Like he's ungrateful. He just doesn't care about me. All these things that we jump to and get. I'm with you. I jump to those conclusions sometimes too. But we want to try and dig deeper. So accepting the child's feelings, regardless of your opinion, and again, not trying to distract them or take away their emotions, but staying present. Let the feelings run their course. If it's a young child, let them cry. It's okay. If you're with them and you're present and you're being compassionate, it's okay to let a child cry and release all of those feelings, because it's healing and it's necessary, and it's important for them to have an expression for what they're going through, even if it seems insignificant. When children cry, so much tension is released in their bodies. I mean, do you remember when you were a kid and you had a long cry or a big heavy cry, and afterwards you kind of felt like it's almost like euphoric afterwards? You either would like fall right asleep because you were so relaxed, or you just felt better. It just feels good sometimes to get it out. And so young children and teens and all people of all ages need to be allowed to cry, and it can't be a gender issue. Boys are allowed to cry. They are human beings, just like girls are, and they are allowed to cry. So that's one of the greatest gifts you can give a child, is not shaming them or shutting them down from their tears, but allowing them to express themselves. The next step you take is to reflect the emotions you see. And you can guess at it. You don't have to have it right. So you could say, your face looks angry. Your body seems tense. Are you angry? Is that right? Am I getting that right? Or you look sad. It looks like something really made you feel sad today. Am I getting that right? And just checking in, because you might be right, you might be wrong, but that shows that you care. And it's also a way for them to learn about their own emotions. So you're teaching them in that moment what their behaviors are reflecting in terms of their emotions. So it's a little bit of like psychoeducation there for them to understand, like, what do I do when I'm angry? So next time they can notice it. Oh, I feel my face getting hot. I'm getting angry. I better take a break. Or, oh, I feel my heart racing. I'm probably feeling afraid of something. I'm going to take some deep breaths, or I'm going to call a friend. So helping them to learn more about themselves can happen when you reflect those emotions. But not only that, it's very validating when somebody sees you. That's what we want. All humans want to be seen and heard and felt. And when you reflect to somebody that you can see them, that you really see them, that brings your anxiety and your highly reactive state down. It calms your nervous system down when you feel heard and seen. The next two steps are for when a child returns to a calm state. So we want to wait until the storm has passed and try then to go back and have a conversation and educate them with empathy. So it's okay to feel all your emotions, even your anger, and then educate them about the feelings. So this might take a little back work for yourself, but that's important, that you're always working on this. This is always going to be a learning process for you if you're raising a child with trauma. So you need to teach yourself some psychological education about emotions and how they show up and what they mean and what they do. And anger is a prime or a secondary emotion, typically. Anger covers up underlying emotions. So the child who's very angry underneath that is probably sad or afraid. And so when we can recognize that, we can have more empathy for the child instead of feeling attacked by them, instead of feeling defensive and angry with them. You can say, okay, I see anger. That means there's sadness and fear underneath. What can I do? How can I approach this differently? Share and solve. So sharing about your own stories. So kids love this. They they have an instinctual desire to know about your life and about what you were like as a kid, because adults seem untouchable. They seem like they're up on this pedestal. They have it all figured out and they have all the answers because they see that a lot, right? They see that adults are usually in charge. They know what they're doing. They're very smart. They have all the information. But we forget that they forget that we were kids one time too. So share a story about a time you got angry or you made a mistake or you felt afraid. Think about some and put them in your memory bank to pull out in one of these situations and say, I remember a time when I got really scared and this is how I felt and this is what I did afterwards. And what could have I done differently in that situation? And try and solve these problems and ask them what they could have done differently next time they're feeling that way. And so you can kind of have a learning experience from all of this explosive behavior instead of it just being brushed under the rug. So you can look at these times of distress and confrontation as opportunities to teach and educate the child about their emotions and about what to do the next time. So I'll share some more tips for climbing to safety. We want to increase time spent with safe, loving people or animals. Animals are a wonderful bridge to creating safety and attachment for children. There's a lot of programs that include equine therapy, so that's with horses. Dogs can be incredibly comforting and soothing and attachment figures for children. And even small pets like a fish or a hamster or something, having something to nurture and take care of helps to build those neural pathways for relating to others, for attaching to others. Even nature can be something a child might attach to instead of a person. And you can use this as sort of building blocks. If you have a child who's very averse to relationships and attaching to people, maybe you find something else they can attach to. It doesn't have to be a human. It can be an object, an item, an activity, a tree, nature, time in nature. It can be a pet, an animal, things like other things to practice getting attached. And then hopefully they can repeat those patterns frequently enough that they'll be able to take the leap into relations with others. Structures, routines, and consistency is paramount, as well as sleep. And I mentioned that the last bullet there. These 4 things are the most crucial things to incorporate after a child has experienced trauma, because again, that safety, that uncertainty, all of that trust has been damaged. And these are the building blocks that rebuild it. Knowing what's coming next, preparing them in advance for changes, limiting the amount of people in and out of their lives, minimizing the amount of disruptions in their routines and changes to their everyday life without any warning. Those kind of things are going to throw them off and make life feel really uncertain and scary. And that's the last thing they need. So really increase structure and routines and boundaries and consistency, as well as sleep. Sleep should come before everything else. So should come before school, homework, all those things. And I know that's not always possible, but it should come before sports. It should come before everything you can think of, because sleep is the foundation for the brain to heal. And then of course, getting moving outside, sunlight, fresh air, vitamin D, all those things help calm the nervous system down and release the stress hormones out of the body and increase endorphins. Some other things we can do are tension releasing exercises and bilateral stimulation. Tension tension releasing exercises are things like shaking your body intentionally, rocking back and forth. So rocking in a rocking chair, jumping on a trampoline, so anything that just shakes all the tension out of your body, including, like, when you're holding a yoga pose for a really long time, or you're doing something like say someone told you to hold your arm out for a really long time. After a couple of minutes, your muscles start to shake. Well, that helps to release the trauma that's stored in the body. And we haven't even gotten to the whole trauma stored in the body thing, and I don't have time to get to it today. But that is what all the research is now showing, is that this trauma actually gets stored in our bodies. And so we need to use these different ways of releasing it from the body, with shaking, with these tension releasing exercises. And bilateral stimulation means doing two things on opposite sides of the body. So this is called a butterfly tap or a butterfly hug. And this can be really calming and soothing in the moment of a panic attack or any type of emotional dysregulation. And the slower you do it, like, you want to find like a nice rhythm that's pretty, not super fast. And you might start out that way initially, and then over time you see that it starts to slow down. It becomes really a way to calm the nervous system. Finding a soothing spot to take a break. If you notice a child is starting to ramp up and you can see the frustration building, say, hey, let's take a break and come back to this later. Or here, let's go to your soothing spot, or let's go to a place where you can feel more relaxed, and provide a rocking chair, things to move their body with, soft music, speak in a soft voice, get down on their level. Use that soothing tone of voice and that caring, sensitive communication, instead of yelling and screaming, because that will just escalate the child and create more dysregulation. Another activity you could try is blowing up a bag or balloon with the negative feelings, and then releasing the feelings out the window or out the front door, or whatever it may be. It's a visualization, and it's a way to do some breathing exercises that makes it a little bit more fun. This might work for younger children, or it could work for teens too. So some things specifically for teens are, one thing I like to use with my clients is a secret question box. And what that looks like can be different, but basically, if you have a box, it could just be a shoe box, or it could be a lock box, whatever you want. But this box is a place that they can put questions or comments, or put anything in there, and there are no rules. There can be curse words on it. There can be anything written on there, but you promise only to look at it yourself and not share it with anybody. And it's whatever's in that box remains a secret, and they're not punished for it either. And that can be a way to get a child to share and express some of the things they're going through without having the anxiety of a face-to-face conversation. And so that can be a way to just get the expression starting. Another thing that we want to do is be honest, period. You have to be honest and keep your word, and not be, what would you say? Not be mincing words and kind of telling half truths. No, that doesn't work. You have to earn their trust before they're going to trust you. And that is backwards from what adults normally think. We usually think they need to earn my trust. I'm the adult. They need to earn my trust. And well, not with children with trauma. They've had their trust, their foundational trust, damaged. And they need to know they can trust you so that they can rebuild their trust. You're not going to trust them first. So I just encourage you to reverse that thinking there. Keep their information as private as possible. Don't let them hear you talking about them to neighbors or friends or on the phone. Don't let them hear you sharing their personal information unless it's positive. Like if you have something positive to share, like, oh yeah, he's really coming along. He got a great grade on his math test, or oh yeah, she's following directions, she's really come a long way. Or if they hear you say something positive, that can be very reinforcing and a good thing. But if they hear you sharing their personal information about their secrets, or their trauma, or their family issues, especially birth family issues, if they hear you talking negatively about their birth mom or father, that can all be very damaging and is going to break their trust in you. So I encourage you to try and stay neutral. If you can't say anything nice, just say neutral. And if you can't find anything positive to say about a child's family, I encourage you to find things in the child that probably came from their family that you can find that are positive. So they have a good sense of humor. Oh, I bet you got that sense of humor from your mom. Or, oh, you have such beautiful brown eyes, just like your mom. Or, something positive, because oftentimes children who've experienced trauma and they're removed from their families just have such a negative view of their birth parents. And when you think that the people you come from are bad, you think you're bad. And that's just what children do. They think like, oh, well, I came from them, so I'm bad too. They identify with their birth parent, and it's really important to stay neutral or to try and be positive about them. Okay, we have a question. For the secret box, is it just meant for them to be able to emote without being face to face, or is it meant for them to share and then have the trusted adult follow up with them about it? Obviously, if they share something troubling or a safety concern, we want to address it. Yes. So the idea is that they put it in the box and you promise that you are going to read it and follow up with them on it. And that is how it's supposed to work. So basically, instead of coming face to face and telling you something really awful that happened, this gives them an opportunity to tell you in a less direct way. Another thing you can try is talking and having conversations, especially with teens, while you're side by side instead of face to face. So whether you're driving in the car or walking down the street, being side by side is much less confrontational and can feel more like a partnership than like a superior and subordinate situation. So I encourage you to do things that are side by side together, whether it's riding bikes or walking or driving in the car. And that's a good time to bring up these heavier topics because it feels less fearful and confrontational. Another really good point is that for children, nighttime can be a time when they feel more vulnerable and more willing to share. So checking in with them before bedtime and saying, is there anything that's bothering you? Is there anything that's on your mind? They might actually be more willing to discuss it with you then, as opposed to during the day. Oh, someone has a good suggestion. I like that. Amber says, with my son, we find that talking to toys or stuffed animals in place of ourselves, he's far more likely to discuss things. I love that. That's a great suggestion. Right, you can be creative with this. Using dolls and play therapy is so effective for kids with trauma. And what you can do is just give them the tools and let them do it themselves. So give them some figurines of a family. You can find them on Amazon, little figurines or little wooden dolls or whatever it might be. Usually they're like dollhouse accessories and stuff, and let them play with those different family members, and likely they'll start to act out some of the themes that they've experienced. And you might not understand them and you might not know them. That's okay. Their brain is processing, and children heal through play. And so that is so beneficial for them. So I encourage you to look into play therapy, see what some of the tools are that play therapists use, and incorporate them into your home or into your classroom, and let them play with those and act out some of their trauma with the toys. Can be very, very healing for them. Yeah, puppets is another one. Yep. So yeah, being with an adult can be very intimidating. It's much easier to talk to a stuffy than it is to a person. So trust the child. Again, trust them before you expect them to trust you, and give them opportunities to build that trust. Let them have a little bit of freedom or leeway, and let them show you that they can be trustworthy. It can be very reinforcing. Be willing to compromise with teens. They are finding their place in the world. They're separating from their primary caregivers, and they care more about their social interactions than their parents at this point, or their caregivers. So you really want to try and compromise with the teen. Say, okay, this is what you want, and this is what I want. How can we find the middle ground? How can we meet in the middle and get both of our needs met in a safe way? That can be very helpful for teens for building trust. and just continue to be patient. It's not going to get fixed overnight. It's a lifelong journey. I'm not saying it can't be healed, that all trauma can't be healed or that you're stuck in it forever, but there may be things where you feel as though the child is healed, and then a couple months later, a couple years later, things start to bubble up and pop up again. That's normal. As human beings, we never arrive at a final destination of perfection. I certainly haven't. So, it's just to keep being patient, and that these things are going to pop up again and again. And there will be periods of time where things might be quiet for a while, and then out of nowhere, things seem to ramp up again and be really explosive. And that's the normal part of this healing process. So to finish off, what makes it worse? Expecting children not to think about what happened to them. That does not help a child. They are always thinking about it. They are always thinking about the parent who's abandoned them. They're always thinking about the parent who's not in their life. They're always thinking about the person close to them that died. They are always thinking about these things. And if we don't talk about it, we're not helping them. So we really want to find opportunities, and don't expect them to come to you and have these discussions. We need to be going to them and opening up opportunities. And I know it's uncomfortable and I know it's hard, but over the long term, it really will improve their outcomes and their ability to have productive, successful lives and healthy emotional lives. Shaming children for their sadness and fear. This is things like, oh, stop crying. Be a big boy, be a big girl. Big kids don't cry, saying, oh, that's nothing, get over it. Things where you're shaming a child, you're putting them down for the way that they feel, very unhelpful. That makes it worse, is another form of trauma and the last thing that they need. Comparing them to other children, also not fair, also very hurtful and not helpful. So saying things like, oh, well, your sister's, she went through it too, and she's not upset. What's wrong with you? These kind of things are not appropriate and not helpful to children. So they are experiencing things differently, and you need to parent a child with trauma differently than you might parent a child who doesn't have any problems with their emotions. Let's see. How much is art therapy utilized in trauma therapy? It's different I think it depends on the therapist and if they're a play therapist or not. Yeah, I used play a lot, but I wasn't specifically a play therapist. Like I was a trauma therapist. I wasn't a play therapist, but I used play in my work with families and children. Because children, they don't sit down and talk to you and tell you about their bad day. They say, will you play with me? That's how children ask for help. They say, will you play with me? And that is their way of processing and expressing themselves, is through play and through peer interactions. They're not going to sit down with you and start telling you about all their trauma. They're going to want to play it out. Denying and minimizing their feelings, saying things like, well, everything happens for a reason, or what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or you're more resilient now because you've experienced XYZ. That may all be fine and well and good, but that's not helpful to somebody who is just trying to survive. Telling someone they're so strong for what they've endured is well-intentioned, but often only helps us feel better and doesn't address the child's pain. So, try and stay away from those things of, oh, you're so resilient, or this made you so strong. Maybe so, but also maybe there's a lot of suffering going on that you just don't know what it feels like to experience. And so it's oftentimes not that these children are so resilient, but that this is the best they can do to survive. So just be keeping that in mind. Some organizations to turn to for more information on this topic: the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, the Child Trauma Academy. This is for more attachment trauma and for younger children. The CTIPP is a wonderful resource. And if you are a kinship family or grand family, which is what I have a lot of experience with, there's grandfamilies.org, which has a ton of resources. I will be sending copies of the recording of this, as long as it worked, through Eventbrite, through the email you provided on Eventbrite. I will send out the recording, and the handouts might have to come from my business email, because I'm not allowed to attach handouts in Eventbrite, which is where you guys all signed up. So I may have to figure out a way to do it with my own like business email. So keep an eye out for something from Beth Tyson, and hopefully it might be 2 emails, one with the recording and then one with the handouts and everything. So I hope you guys found this useful. I want to open it up now for questions. We have about 15 minutes. I'd love to hear your comments about this, how it impacted you, what you thought of it. Anything you can provide to me, even sending me a little note afterwards and letting me know. I love to have testimonials to put on my website or to use on social media. Follow me on my social media. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, on Instagram at Beth Tyson _trauma care. On Facebook, I have a business page and a Facebook group, and it's called Emotominds. And in my Facebook group, I share a lot of tips and guidance for childhood trauma. And I also have my website, and you can find all the links to my social media on my website, bethtyson.com, and also links to my books. I have 3 books now that I've co-authored, which is really cool. One I wrote myself, the children's book, A Grand Family for Sullivan, and then I had 2 co-authored books come out this past year. One is called Where Social Work Can Lead You, and it's for social workers or anyone aspiring to learn more about the social work field. And then there's also a book called The Parenting Odyssey, which is all about different people's stories of parenting through the pandemic and what it's been like, and some tips and guidance for dealing with the pandemic trauma. So I hope that this was helpful to everyone. I'm seeing some positive feedback in the chat that you love the webinar. Let's see, can you give more information or refer me to how service dogs? Yeah, service dogs, absolutely. I actually my daughter's school had a service dog come and talk to them. I wonder where you're located. I'm trying to get my school district to approve the use of a service dog. Okay, I have an organization. I think it's called Pause for Affection, but I'll look it up. And if you email me, I will send it to you. My email is beth@bethtyson.com. So yeah, so I'm gonna save the chat and read through it and see. And now I wish I knew how to. Let me see if I can open it up for. Let me see if I can unmute everybody and we can do some questions. Let me see. It's probably in my settings somewhere. My hair's all over the place. Okay. Let's see if I can find. Oh, here's a question and answer. Okay, here's a question. What if it is trauma they don't remember but react to instinctively? Will it still come up in adolescence? Can I answer this? Can you guys hear me still? Okay. Okay, yes. Typically, if there was a trauma that took place and it was before they have memories, our body has memories. We have somatic memories. We have visual memories, which are memories that we remember visually. And then we have emotional memories. And so early childhood trauma that doesn't have a memory, like a visual memory, will still have an emotional memory. So yes, the trauma will likely rise up probably in adolescence around that time. So intervening again as early and as soon as possible is so critical. I can't say it enough, but it really is not something that just because they seem fine, they're okay. That could be a fawn response too. So fawning, which we didn't talk about, is when a child is super compliant, over compliant, straight A student, cooperative, follows all the rules, does all the directions, because they're scared to death to do anything else out of fear of being abused or neglected or rejected. So that fawning can look like the child is fine. Oh, they're fine. No behaviors, doing well in school. Everything's okay. The child had a trauma. It needs to be addressed. I don't care how old they were when it happened. So please continue to seek that and be an advocate for your child, and don't give up until you find someone who will listen to you. Another question. Let's see. like to hear your thoughts on ways that we can respond supportively when a child of mine who's almost 5 is in a state of dysregulation and is either hitting, kicking others, or kicking their door until I think the door is going to break. It's getting hard to get her to stop and keep others safe without physically picking her up or putting her on her bed, sometimes over and over again. But sometimes that feels like it's triggering to her in and of itself. And I could keep her from kicking the door by sitting in her room between her and the door, but she seems triggered by the fact that I'm so close. One thing that can sometimes bring these episodes to an abrupt end is asking her a question like, what socks do you think I should wear? But I'm not sure if that's unhelpful distraction. Long question. Love your thoughts. She said that, not me. Long question. Would love any thoughts you have on this question. Yeah, I mean, that's really tough, because, it sounds like she needs that space. It sounds like coming too close to her that time is not helpful. You can tell by her behavior. I'm wondering what else you might be able to do to make sure she stays safe. Maybe there's padding you can put on the door so that she can't kick it in. Maybe removing anything in the room that she could hurt herself with, even if it's just literally only having a mattress in her room and nothing, nothing else. Because for safety reasons, that might be something you do, or at least limiting things that she could throw or break or hurt herself on. There's a lot of different things that you could do besides physically being in her presence. But if you could find a way to at least be within viewing, so you can see her so that she's safe. Maybe it's using a baby monitor, so that you can still see her and know that she's safe when you're on the other side of the door, until she, is able to feel more regulated. But yeah, I think that's a good question. And I know I didn't answer it perfectly, but I hope that that helps. Let's see. In the chat, let's see. What about students who are older and are afraid to talk about their trauma with a therapist, but are self-medicating by smoking weed? Yes, that is very common. Often it's tough to get older kids to talk about their feelings. And I think that might be where it could be more helpful to have a mentor or somebody who is more like has been through what they've been through. Because oftentimes teens and even adults, they think, oh, well, the therapist has it all figured out. They're going to judge me. I can't tell this person anything. I can't trust them. But a mentor would be someone who has kind of been through what they've been through in the past and able to relate to it a little bit more. So that might be one avenue to go to give them an opportunity to express herself to somebody. And the smoking weed is definitely, an issue, and is what happens when we don't address this trauma early on in life. Is oftentimes trauma leads to substance abuse, which leads to a whole host of other problems, whether it's incarceration or job loss or homelessness or you know abusing their own children because they're addicted. So it's a cycle that just keeps going and going if we don't interrupt it. And it's our job as their adults and as their caregivers to break this cycle of trauma as much as we can. And it's not always going to be possible, but you have to try your damnedest, and getting them the support that they need is the only way to do it. All right, let me see if I have any other questions. Could a traumatic birth lead to trauma and separation anxiety? Yes, traumatic birth is a thing. If there were complications during birth, if there was medical trauma, that's another huge one that kids go through that's never really talked about. But oftentimes children are traumatized by medical procedures that are necessary for their safety and for their lives, but still leaves trauma in their body. So there are things that you can do, and obviously I don't have time to go into it too much detail about medical trauma and birth trauma, but there are supports and things that you can do to help a child who's traumatized from those experiences. And yes, I think that traumatic birth can lead to trauma and separation anxiety. Let's see what other questions we have. Do we tell them that we know of the neglect and abuse, or just treat the symptoms, behavior of trauma? Do we tell them what we know, or just treat the symptoms? So are you saying Do you teach them about childhood trauma? If that's your question, yes, you can educate them about what they've been through. And it's called psychoeducation basically, but letting them know. In fact, I'm working with an organization right now called Connect Our Kids, and we're developing an animated series of videos on childhood trauma for adolescents, teens, and young adults to help them understand the psychological impact of the trauma that they've experienced in their lives, and to give them the tools to start the healing process so much earlier than most of us could, because a lot of times they don't even know what's happened to them. They don't even know that this trauma has impacted their lives. They need to know that. If you don't know the truth of your life, how can you move forward? How can you achieve? How can you have healthy relationships? You need to know the truth about your life. And young children don't need a lot of details, but they need to know why they're not living with mom and dad. They need to know as much information as you can give them in an age appropriate manner. So you don't want to burden a younger child with a lot of gory details and negative information about their parents or what's going on in their lives, but you can say your parents couldn't keep you safe. It's now my job to keep you safe, and I'm going to be here for you, keeping you safe. And you don't have to necessarily go into all the details, and there may be questions that come from that, but that's why you really want to be working with a therapist through some of this to help guide you on what to say. And that's another reason why I wrote the book, because I give language to the adults in A Grand Family for Sullivan to talk about why Sullivan can't live with his mom and dad. And grandma gives him an answer and says, she wants to keep him safe, and that she's sad too and worried too about mom and dad. And that it's hard to not have answers, but this is the best that we have right now, and we're going to get through it together. And that's what children really want to know, is that no matter what, that they have one person that they can get through it with together, and who's not going to abandon them. Another question: any support strategies, ideas working with a child with special needs, showing anger and aggression following a family bereavement? They are not understanding the family member is not around, looking for them every day. Oh, that is heartbreaking. I can't even imagine. Yes, I would like you to, so I would wondering what age, I'm guessing this is a young child, or maybe somebody with developmental delays if they're not understanding the family member is not around. That's typical for young children. They don't understand death. Young children don't understand death the same way that older kids and adults do. So they comprehend it in bits and pieces over time. So you have to keep reminding them that the person has died, which means we can no longer see them, that they're no longer here with us. We can't see them or talk to them, and that they're not coming back. And that child may need to ask that question many, many times before it sinks in for them, because they just can't understand the fact that that the person is gone. And so, yes, the child, so Pauline says the child is 13 years, but functioning around 7 years. So this is a child who has delayed development and might have, other cognitive issues that are going on, but it sounds like they just haven't been able to comprehend the loss and feeling very angry and frustrated by that. So I would say that there's lots of great books. There's a book called The Invisible String, written by Patrice Karst, that I use with adults and children who are grieving. There's lots of grief activities I could give you, but basically it's going to be having that conversation multiple times and letting them know that when somebody dies, it means we can't see them and we can't talk to them anymore. We can talk to them in our hearts. We can continue a relationship with people who are gone psychologically. We don't have to close the door to them emotionally, but physically that person isn't here anymore. I hope that answers your question. I know that sounds so hard. It really does. You guys are so brave. I just want to say that you guys are all really brave to be facing what you're facing and sticking this out every day amongst all the other trouble in our world right now. And I'm so grateful that you were here and took the time today to be with us and learn about ways that you can support children, because this is how we break the cycle of trauma. This is how we break intergenerational trauma that gets passed down from person to person to person. Somebody needs to interrupt that cycle, and you can really be that person. Um, it's really the only way that it'll happen. And you can be the cycle breaker in your own family. If you had trauma from your parents or their grandparents that got passed down to you, you can be the one that stops it in your family through getting help for yourself, going to therapy for yourself, and doing healing and learning and researching all about trauma, so that you don't inadvertently repeat these patterns with your own family members. And that will also break this cycle of intergenerational trauma. Let's see, we're at an hour and 30 minutes, and most people stayed on. So I appreciate you guys staying till the very end. I really hope that you'll continue to connect with me. I'd love it if you could sign up for my newsletter. That way, the next time I do a free webinar on different topics about once a month. And so that's why I love having this monthly newsletter, because that way you'll be informed of when the next free one is. And I just love connecting with all of you and hearing about your lives and supporting one another. So please reach out to me if you have questions, comments. If you would love to leave a little testimonial on this training, I would appreciate that too. And yes, sign up for the newsletter on my website, bethtyson.com, or join my Facebook group, Emotominds. It's like a little, mini classroom where I try to share guidance and best practices and all kinds of research and things on children's mental health and families and children and child development and all kinds of stuff, parenting. And so I hope that the recording works and that I can send it all out to you in the next couple of days. And let's see, do I have any last questions? I don't think I see any. Just that a lot of people are thankful for the webinar, which is awesome. I'm sorry I didn't get to hear you guys. I'll have to look into my settings and fix that, but I appreciate you for being patient with my technology. And I'm so glad that the universe aligned and my internet service came back on, because that would have been really disappointing if I couldn't be here with you guys today. So thank you for your time and attention. You've been an amazing audience. Your questions were phenomenal. I hope that I was able to be a support to you, and please stay in touch and visit my website, bethtyson.com. I'll see you all soon.